Tonight on Greater Boston, I'm Sue O'Connell in for Jim Browdy. The scenes of death and destruction in Ukraine, along with the millions of refugees fleeing the Russian invasion, have been met with sympathy and support from around the world. And rightfully so. But what about people fleeing violence and oppression in other countries? And later, host of GBH News All Things Considered, Arun Rath joins me ahead of a special edition of In It Together tomorrow night, marking the 2-year anniversary of the COVID crisis. After going days without electricity, heat, food, or water, Ukrainians trapped by constant shelling in the city of Mariupol were targets today of one of the worst attacks yet. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian airstrikes destroyed a maternity and children's hospital full of some of the most defenseless citizens in this war. For the lucky who have been able to flee, the journey has been a traumatic one, with more than 1 million children managing to cross at various borders, most having to leave behind fathers and older brothers who are not allowed to leave. And the footage has been heart-wrenching. One scene that got a lot of attention on social media this week was this video of a young boy sobbing as he crossed into Poland. At first, many believed he was all alone. Polish media later reported his mother was ahead, but still, his pain is visceral. Prompting some to ask, how does one see this, then turn around and complain about gas prices? This is heartbreaking. And it is. But as many have also correctly pointed out, not all young refugees have been received with such open arms, and many are still suffering in relative silence, like those in Afghanistan, trying to survive a hunger crisis after 20 years of war and the resurgence of the Taliban. It's a situation so dire that a UNICEF official recently warned, without urgent, concerted action, many of the country's children will not live to see spring. Then there are the kids fleeing gang warfare in Central America and Mexico, sometimes with family and sometimes alone, unable to apply for asylum in the U.S. as Biden continues a Trump-era policy. I'm joined by Jacqueline Bhabha, a longtime human rights lawyer who is director of research at the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights, and Sue Roses, an immigration attorney who is a director of legal programs with the Rian Center in Boston. Welcome to both of you. Jacqueline, I want to start with you first. If you could just let me know what your take is on why some of these crises get our attention for a period of time and why others we either get numb to or just don't pay enough attention to.
So I think it depends who the we you're talking about is, Sue, because we, the consumer of news, of television, of radio, of newspaper reports, I think are very often taken by these stories for quite long periods of time. So if the we is the public, I think that exposure to the heart-wrenching suffering of innocent civilians really touches us. And I don't think people are fatigued that quickly. I think, by contrast, if we are the journalists or the newspaper editors, then I think there are different demands on their attention. So I was talking recently to some Ukrainian colleagues who were saying, we realize that the window of opportunity with global media is limited. And so we want to get this message out urgently because we know that things will shift. And indeed, I was also talking to an Afghan friend who said exactly the same. All the attention is now on Ukraine, and understandably so. But in Afghanistan, the situation has gone from bad to worse. So I think it's really a question of the channels of communication that we are able to encounter. It's not so much that as consumers we shut off, because I think people do have ability for really sustained solidarity if the states that they're in continue to support that solidarity.
Yeah, a number of folks that I spoke to remember the child being put over the fence in Afghanistan. We have an image of that, the baby that was lifted over the barbed wire during the attempted evacuation from Afghanistan. She was returned with her parents on a flight out of Kabul, and they now live in Arizona, so a happy ending there. But Sue, the stories of children fleeing and being refugees, especially here in the United States, is not one that often has a happy ending, especially for those who are fleeing from Central America and Mexico.
Right, that's absolutely true. Frequently, Central American asylees and refugees who are fleeing gang violence in their own countries and other forms of repression are not received very well by the US. First, if they're caught at the border, they're often placed in detention facilities. As we know, under the Trump administration, they were often separated from family members, and then they were transferred to Red Cross shelters. So that's how the process begins, right? And hopefully they have contact for some family in the United States. But once they get here, they're thrown into a legal system that is not designed to protect children, that does not provide for legal representation for children. So they're very much dependent upon organizations like Kids in Need of Defense. That's a national organization that helps, try to find pro bono representation for children who are, in our case, at RIAN, we represent people from over 120 different countries around the world, but we do have many Haitian and Central American immigrants seeking to remain in the US. So we often have to take some of these special immigrant juvenile cases, and they take a very long time. It's a long process. It's many years. Kids don't have work permits. They can't get driver's licenses for many, many years if they're coming from Central America. So it's a very disparate treatment, unfortunately.
Jacqueline, one of the things that has always shocked me about how some people react to welcoming refugees, and just for the sake of argument, let's just pretend, I know we don't live in that world, but let's just say that there are refugees coming into a community. To me, the people that have been able to have the fortitude and the strength and the ability to get their family to safety, to really go through the hardships and the trauma that almost every refugee goes through to get somewhere safe, are exactly the type of people that I would want to welcome into my community and into this country. What has to happen for the general public to sort of get that message and to see folks fleeing hardship and refugees entering our communities for the value that they bring to this country?
I think that what has to happen, to answer your really good question, is that the generosity and the solidarity of community members like you and me has to be matched with support from government and state institutions. So I think that we very often see an outpouring of generosity. And we're seeing it now in Europe with Ukrainians, but we saw it here with Afghans, and we saw it in Mexico with some of the caravans and so on. And you see it again and again. I think that instinct and that human solidarity, that identification with the suffering of another, particularly, as you say, people who are admirable, who have so much to offer, often come with skills and with enthusiasm. But even those who don't, frankly, deserve our generosity as well. I think that the trouble is that very often that generosity of spirit of the public is not matched by a state that is ready and prepared, that anticipates the need. And instead, people feel that they're abandoned with their generosity and nobody else is helping. Nobody is participating. Nobody is making sure that schools are able to accept extra children or that healthcare facilities are equipped. And I think that's the real difficulty we face. And so if I could just spend 1 second talking about Ukraine, I think the only really good piece of news in this heart-wrenching tragedy is that for the first time ever, the European Union has opened its doors and said, you guys can come and you can stay safely for a year, at least, till the 4th of March, 2023. If you were in Ukraine on the 24th of February and you left after the 24th of February and you're still leaving now, you are welcome and you can choose where you're going to go. Now, what a difference that makes, not only to the refugees who are fleeing, but also to the communities, because the communities that are hosting them know that these people will be able to work. They'll be able to look after themselves. They may need your help today or tomorrow, but in a month or two, they'll be up and running. Now, that is what makes it possible. So I think in the US too, when we're talking about Central Americans coming, if they come and they have a legal authority to come, and they have the ability to work and support their families, that's what they want, then communities into which they settle will be inclined to accept them. But I think where people feel that they're going to have to carry the brunt of the responsibility for months on end, that their own quality of life is going to be threatened, then you can't be surprised that eventually people get weary.
Sue, Jacqueline makes a good point. I said during the one of the waves of the unaccompanied minors coming over, had they been puppies coming over, people would have been lining up to adopt them and bring them home and paying any money they needed to fly them across the country. But because they were children, and many of them brown and black, it didn't have the same impact as if they had been pugs coming over. What can we do to get our government to lead the way on this? What can we get to have the government do what we would do as individuals and then help us as a community to provide refuge for these refugees that deserve it? And I mean deserve it, they all deserve it is what I mean.
Right. No, and I, to your point, before I answer that specific question, to your point, I mean, I was reading an article about a mother who put her child on a train to Slovakia, right? And that child was received as a hero, an 11-year-old boy. And when Central American parents send their kids to the border, you know, and their kids are often riding on top of a train known as the Beast, you know, which is death-defying, literally, they're not received the same way. You know, we put them in cages, we separate them from their families. But to your question, I mean, I think the most important thing really is to get involved politically, to be communicative with your representatives, with your senators, to get involved with human rights organizations. There are all sorts of different, you know, human rights organizations that you should be in touch with. But I think really the most important thing is the political lobbying with your representatives. And, you know, we try to, at the Rian Immigrant Center, sometimes we will reach out to congressional aides for help, you know, and you have to use those humanitarian stories. You have to, you know, sometimes have clients who are willing to put their own personal trauma on display, if you will, in the media, but with the goal of, you know, showing that, look, this is, you know, black or brown or white, like these people are suffering, this is trauma, and this is an opportunity to really focus on empathy for all of these human beings. And they want to contribute to our society, and we need to be able to make that happen and create legal paths for them to do that.
Jacqueline, we just have a couple of seconds left, but I imagine that you would agree that if a lot of the time, if we can focus the conversation and center the conversation on the children that are suffering, it might open up the door for others to see the parents and the grandparents that go along with them.
I completely agree with you. I think that we all know what it's like to have a child who you can't comfort, or a child who's wet or who's hungry or who's in distress. And everybody has felt that pang. And so while one doesn't want to exploit images of suffering in a kind of degrading way, and one doesn't want to permanently cast some groups as being always victims. At the same time, I think mobilizing solidarity is really important, and it's an enormous contribution that you guys can make.
Well, Jacqueline Bhabha, Sue Roses, I appreciate both of you for your work, and thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.
2 years ago today, the words COVID and coronavirus were really just starting to become part of our daily language. Case counts were suddenly climbing, and more than 20 deaths in at least 34 states made people start to pay attention. It was 2 years ago tomorrow that Governor Charlie Baker declared a state of emergency, calling on business owners, schools, and other organizations to shut down for a few weeks.
The highly contagious nature of this disease means that if everyone plays their part in slowing the spread, the number of people who become infected and require medical attention doesn't spike all at once, which would overwhelm many of our systems.
Flattening the curve, we said it over and over again. At the time, there were 92 confirmed COVID cases in Massachusetts. Now, 2 years later, 6 million people have died globally, and we're nearing a death toll of 1 million people in the U.S. alone. Grim milestones we never thought we'd see, but we've also moved over those 2 years from a time of fear and uncertainty with little information about how COVID spread to gain a greater understanding of the virus. Research and vaccines led to reopenings and hope. With a return to normalcy, or perhaps a new normal, on the horizon. It's a 2-year-long journey my next guest will be reflecting on tomorrow night. Arun Rath is the executive editor and host of All Things Considered and In It Together here at GBH. Welcome so much. It's great to see you.
It's good to see you virtually.
Yes, exactly. You know, I can't tell you what a great comfort In It Together was for me. It came at the window when I would find a reason to escape the house as often as I could to go do an errand during the lockdown. Talk to me about how this great radio tradition of gathering folks during a time of crisis, how it came to be here on GBH.
Well, it really came together the week of the lockdown. In just a few days, we pulled the idea together for this, that we would do an hour-long show, would follow All Things Considered. We would take calls and talk to experts. And that was the basic idea of it, because you remember what it was like 2 years ago. We were all freaking out, and we all had so many fundamental questions about how we should live our lives. Should we wash our groceries? You know, what should we be doing with our kids? It was just it was so much of a disorienting time that there was the need for it, obviously, right away. I think the way the durability of it was more of the surprise over how it turned into, well, as you mentioned, it being for you a really valuable resource over the months as the pandemic wore on.
Arun, one of the things that I loved about it was, of course, you know, obviously you spoke to experts and got the information and science as it was happening, and we're in a great fertile place here in Massachusetts for experts, but you also talked to real people who were having real experiences, and they were able to very articulately and eloquently share with you what was happening. Talk to me about some of the people that you talked to and how that really brought such a richness to the program.
Well, it's interesting because definitely the program has had more, you know, quote unquote, ordinary people feature than any other show that I've ever worked on. And it's really been one of the strengths of it, because I gotta say, every single ordinary person we had on was a great guest. I mean, we're talking hundreds of shows. That pretty much doesn't ever happen. You know, in broadcasting, there's going to be at least a couple of people who aren't amazing, but they were all fantastic. And we would just, you know, it was different from booking your typical radio program, because we were going right to people that we know. We had, my rabbi was on the show a couple of times. Had our my own veterinarian was actually on the show as well. So we did a segment talking about people who were facing, you know, keeping their pets in the during the pandemic. It really is, and I would say some of the most poignant moments probably were we did on more than one occasion, but one week in particular, we did a series of remembrances where we were talking to people, and again, not people you would hear from ordinarily, but about family members that they had lost. And we would spend, you know, a good, consider this, an In It Together length interview, a good 15 minutes talking with them about their loved one that they'd lost. And not only was it amazing for them and meaningful for them, but for all of us, you know, because we weren't able to grieve together for so long. So a place to grieve was maybe one of the most important things about it.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that as well. I mean, we're approaching in the United States the figure of 1 million people over 2 years that we have lost. And I continue to be astounded that, you know, I don't want to sound judgy, but I'm astounded that we're not more upset about that. And In It Together provided a place where folks could go and actually share the stories of their loved ones. And I'm wondering, as we hit this 2-year mark, What are your feelings when you know you were doing this every night, and we had all these other things happening as well, the call for racial justice and equity, as well as the election. What was it like for you to go through this and now be here where we're approaching this 1 million death mark?
Well, you know, I think the show, in a way, In It Together, helped me keep my mental health intact to a large extent, because I was facing the same things that everybody else was. And I had this wonderful luxury, in a way, of getting to talk to these experts in real time and get answers to the questions. I mean, it really weighs very heavily on me, you know, because I do the news, I do All Things Considered before I would do In It Together. And I was the person among the people every single day reading the numbers, those numbers over and over again as they got into the thousands and into the millions. And it was really something to be able to have on In It Together, a place where I was started every show reading the numbers. But unlike the newscast, I could take a minute and just, you know, have like a Walter Cronkite of just like, this is awful, everybody, and have a moment about it together. And yeah, again, I guess it's going back to having a place to grieve, which has been so important, and I think really helped give me strength getting through this.
Again, what I loved about it was great traditional radio at a time when we have so many other options, and many of them completely wrong and not reliable and giving us bad information. And I found a great comfort to have it be in a way that I grew up with. What can folks look forward to in this special pop-up edition?
Well, we're going to talk to a lot of the people that we have talked to over the couple of years. I would say the one that sticks with me the most, or that I think was going to stick with me the most, is Gladys Vega of La Colaborativa, who used to be known as the Chelsea Collaborative. We were talking about how we focused a lot on the show on the communities who were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, people of color, immigrant communities, and that's something that, you know, Chelsea was a COVID hotspot and represented a lot of these people. And it was great to check in with her and hear how great they did with their vaccination efforts, but also to hear from her how much it meant to them to be heard and seen by GBH and all of us through this process. And her ask coming out of this is that please keep seeing us. So that's my big takeaway right now.
We direct folks tomorrow to the In It Together pop-up show. Arun Rath, thank you so much for the work that you have done on this. It's been exceptional, and I'm grateful to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Again, you can catch that very special episode of In It Together tomorrow at 7 on GBH Radio, gbhnews.org, or the GBH News app. That's it for tonight. Jim will be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Hey folks, Edgar B. Herwick III here from GBH's Curiosity Desk, where you ask questions and I find answers. Today we are on location in the kitchen to answer a question from Wayne Furstenberg from Northborough.
I'm a banana guy Monday through Friday at my routine meals, and that's my snack late in the day. And then some days I don't feel like having it, or I don't get to it. And, you know, the bananas get older.
And when those bananas get older, a few unwelcome guests tend to appear.
Where do fruit flies come from when my fruit is rotting? It seems like an annoying miracle that they just suddenly appear out of nowhere.
Shakespeare may have asked, "What's in a name?" But in the case of fruit flies, we'd be wise to take a moment to examine the moniker, especially because the little bugs that are messing with Wayne's bananas aren't really fruit flies at all.
The real fruit flies are another group of organisms in the group Tephrithidae. If you're in Australia or warmer climates and you're talking about fruit flies in your garden or fruit flies attacking your crops, that's the fruit fly you're probably talking about.
Here in the US, what we call fruit flies are actually members of a completely different family of insects Drosophilidae. Now there's about 4,000 different species, a handful of which we tend to see around the house. And here's the weird thing. They don't even eat fruit.
When we say fruit flies, we kind of expect that this animal's attacking your fruit and ruining your fruit, and that's not true for the Drosophilids. They're attracted to overripe and rotten fruit, and their larvae are not actually consuming much of the fruit. They're actually more interested in the yeasts and bacteria and things that are growing on rotten fruit.
This is why some scientists have advocated for calling them pomace flies or vinegar flies instead of fruit flies.
They are attracted to particular smells. So things like vinegar, acetic acid, those odors are really attractive to females because that's an indicator of the kind of environment that they're looking for.
And they are looking for that kind of an environment to lay eggs. And a typical kitchen is a fruit fly dream home. Fruit bowls, yes. Garbage cans, check. Kitchen drains, affirmative. All prime locations to lay eggs. And man, can they do that. Typical fruit fly breeds at a pace that would make rabbits blush.
Female fruit fly can lay roughly 100 eggs a day, and she can live for around a month in some cases. So over time, that's hundreds and hundreds of eggs per female if the conditions are just right.
Fruit flies mature fastest in warm temperatures, so we tend to see more of them in the summer when we also have a lot of fresh fruits and veggies around. Now, when conditions are right, fruit flies can go from egg to adult in just over a week. So you can easily have a scenario where just 2 or 3 tiny little fruit flies make their way into your kitchen through a window or a door, totally undetected, and a week later, you literally have hundreds of them being born and bred right there in your kitchen.
It does feel like they come out of nowhere, but that's because the larvae of fruit flies, the babies, are really, really small. So they're so small that most folks won't notice them if you're just kind of casually looking for where they come from.
And yes, that does mean that if you pick up a banana on, say, a Thursday and a small colony emerges, there is a chance that you have eaten some of their siblings earlier in the week.
Oh, I guarantee everybody has already eaten quite a lot of insect eggs and insect parts in their lives. That's just protein. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you.
And while their unique combination of size and speed makes them a particularly pesky pest in the kitchen, it has also helped them thrive in another location, the research lab.
Even though they look really alien and different, fruit flies share a lot of their basic biochemistry, genetics, neurology, all of those things with humans. And so they've become like the lab rat of science, except even more so than lab rat.
We can thank the Drosophilids for a whole bunch of our recent breakthroughs in fields like medicine, biochemistry, and genetics. In fact, no fewer than 6 Nobel Prizes have been awarded to scientists for breakthroughs that they have made, researching the humble fruit fly. So, in conclusion, the fruit fly, bothersome on bananas, but a boon for biochemistry. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and perhaps most importantly, let me know what you are curious about and all of those questions that have been bugging you, because hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. Stay curious out there. I'm actually hungry. This is really good.
The Curiosity Desk is sponsored by Emerson College, inspiring curiosity and creative expression in all of us.